Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to today's DevOps.com program brought to you by Techstrong and Akamai. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel ahead. First, I need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and this is going to be a kind of a discussion-based topic, so we do hope that you have questions. We want you to send those in using that Q&A tab on the right side of the screen. Over there, you'll find a couple of other options, the first of which being the chat tab. And I'd like you to start warming that up for me right now. Let us know from where you are joining us, just so we make sure that you're there and we make sure that chat function is working correctly. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of our call today. So our topic is finding the right cloud for the right workload. And I'm joined by Nikola Rakic, Chief Technology Officer at NSoft, Pavel Despot, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Akamai, and we have our very own Mike Rothman, Chief Strategy Officer here at Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Nikola, Pavel, and Mike, thank you all for joining me today. Mike, do you want to get us kicked off?
I do. Thank you, Cody. Welcome, Nikola and Pavel. We'll go through you guys in a sec. I just want to kind of set the stage for why we're here, what we're doing, why you've all taken, a couple of minutes out of your day to spend with us. We've been doing work with Akamai. It was Linode first, now Akamai since the acquisition, really for the past 18 months. And we've been kind of looking into how DevOps and really DevOps type motions and thought process and a lot of the actions that come out of DevOps, how that impacts public cloud. We've done a number of different surveys. This will actually be the 5th that we've just completed. And we tend to focus on a little bit of a different topic each quarter. In this quarter, we really wanted to focus in on multi-cloud and portability and really kind of giving folks a sense of really where people's heads were at in terms of, again, this idea of using, multiple clouds for, different workloads. And as we were doing the research, which we'll dig into, a decent amount as we go through today's session, it really just became obvious that, one of the things that we thought could add the most value and help folks out the most was really giving you a sense of how to pick the right cloud, right, for a specific workload. And that's one of the things that's been different, right? Back in the old days, right? And I don't know, I know Nikola and Pavel are old enough to remember, maybe some of you aren't, when you actually had a data center, right? And in that data center, you had a certain amount of equipment that you had to buy and you had to provision and you had to, kind of rack and stack and do all that kind of stuff. And that meant that a lot of your applications were kind of stuck. I mean, your architectural options were pretty much what you had in the data center to be able to leverage. Now, yeah, you could buy new stuff, but, that was a couple of weeks to a couple of months to get everything provisioned, and everything moved a lot slower. Now that we're in this age of public cloud, you can pretty much kind of design your infrastructure for what the application needs. And you're not really restricted to just using one. So whether you're in a big hyperscaler, maybe you're looking at some alternative clouds, you have a lot more options now for what it is that you need to do in order to optimize your environment for the workloads and the applications that are running on top of it. So enough, even though, I could listen to myself talk all day. That's not really what it's about here. I want to, kind of introduce each of the panelists, let them talk a little bit about, kind of their background and what they've done. And then we'll dive into the topic. So Nikola, why don't we start with you? Who are you? Where you at today? And again, day job. So what do you do, for your day job?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikola Rakic, and I'm the CTO of NSoft. We are an IT company based in Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we provide software as a service solutions for betting and gaming industry. And we've been a long year customer of Linode, so we were glad to join this webinar when approached by Akamai. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I'm the CTO of NSoft, and my daily job is everything concerning technology in our company, including infrastructure and especially cloud and costs involving infrastructure and so on. Yeah.
No, that's great. Welcome,
Thank you.
Nicola. Pavel, how are you, man? How are you doing today? Who are you? Kind of obviously you work for Akamai now, but yeah, just let's hear a little bit about your background.
Doing well. Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. So Pavel Despot, I am a recovering infrastructure and ops person from one of those data center things that Mike used to talk about for the carriers back in the day doing that infrastructure. And then about 10 years ago, I moved over to Akamai and worked mostly with our high-tech providers. So think of software as a service providers, those folks who used to deliver software via CD, dare I say tape, those other mechanisms, right? And they are then having to deliver it electronically and also refactor this whole thing to offer their software as a SaaS. So worked there for, like I said, 9 years. Right before Linode, Akamai was already looking to focus on cloud and what we can do there with the whole slew of products, which I won't get into now. And the acquisition happens. So that brings us to the day-to-day now, which is looking after and helping go out and talk to folks about how this whole distributed network thing works with the cloud and what that really means for the workloads that you want to choose, how you secure them, how you deliver them, and what it, just as importantly, doesn't mean.
Yeah, you bet. So we were kind of getting ready and chatting it up a little bit before the session. Paul, you made an interesting point that multi-cloud is one of the least surprising and kind of most predictable, kind of things that we've seen. Let me pull the slides back up for a sec. One of the questions that we did ask as part of the survey this year is, how many cloud providers are you currently using? And as you can see, and it was currently and then in 2023. And what you have is one single cloud provider, decent amount. And that's just based on the numbers, not the percentages on that. But decent amount, kind of that goes to very little, right? Two, again, kind of we look currently, again, certainly decreasing. 3 to 4, again, kind of decreasing from that standpoint, and 5 or more, we do start to see an increase there, right? But what we see in the trend here is clearly folks are moving more towards more providers rather than less providers. And again, very obvious. Everybody, kind of talks about, the fact that multi-cloud is a thing and we have to, kind of get ready for it. But again, from your perspective, probably again, working with a lot of the clients out there, what are some of the drivers that are really pushing for, more than one cloud, and why is that single provider, not sufficient? And Nicola, don't get too comfortable. I'm going to ask you, the same question in a minute.
Sure.
I think from our standpoint, I'd classify it into 2 big buckets, by accident and on purpose, right? So especially if you look over the last decade, there has been Akamai itself, right? And probably most of the folks on here have been part of or involved in some sort of M&A. And on the IT side, that of course means you're inheriting systems, you're inheriting infrastructure. Inevitably, that is a driver of multi-cloud, right? And it's not just cloud, right? I know we're talking about cloud, but you also have different routers, you have different device management software, right? This is not specific to cloud. So the first thing we see is exactly that. And if I look at my customer base, there was a ton of it, and that was one of the big reasons. The other reason, I think, number 2, is I need it, especially as you get into more mature organizations that have taken advantage of kind of these decentralized cloud native applications. All of a sudden, it's not that critical if group X doing whatever functionality decides to choose to use whatever provider for whatever reason they have, be it location, price, functionality, availability, what have you. So that's really enabled folks to, again, if you get away from this monolithic approach, to say, all right, I like this provider, I like the functionality, I like XYZ about it, and integrating that into the overall solution is no longer such a big challenge as when you had these big gigantic LAMP stacks or these like J2EE things that you're trying to, God forbid, distribute.
Yeah, that's right. So Nicole, I'll turn it to you as well. And I know you kind of have multiple cloud providers in place. What were some of the drivers that, kind of forced you down that path? We'll get into selection later, but, just kind of understand the scenario that you're, facing and what drove you towards multiple providers.
Yeah, you asked what forced us. That's actually a good point. We were literally forced into being multi-cloud from the very beginnings. So, but when choosing cloud providers, there are several obviously important things that an organization should consider, such as global presence, general performance parameters, security, compliance, availability, and so on. I guess that the same is true for us as for others. However, there were certain things that during the years led us into direction of using multiple cloud providers. As I mentioned, we are a software provider for the gaming and the betting industry, and our customers are operators in that industry. So it is a highly regulated industry, and we often have situations where we need to comply with the local regulations of the countries or regions where the clients are located. So I guess that forced us into thinking how to be, I don't know, cloud agnostic, or how to put it. And we've learned early on that in order to grow and extend our reach in the industry, we need to remain the cloud agnostic as possible. And this means that we also have to have the know-how, the expertise in our company to make that happen. Since we were not comfortable using, how to say it, off-the-shelf solutions of big hyperscalers, since that would definitely lock us in, and we couldn't afford to go that path.
Yeah. Good. And I do want to dig into that, quite a bit, right? Because to me, that's, kind of a lot of the challenge. And I've been doing and I come at it from a security perspective, right? I've been doing security for 30 something years, and the last 10 to 12 has really been focused almost exclusively on cloud. And we have this old saying, right? It's really hard to be good at cloud security on one platform. It's exponentially harder to do it on two platforms. It's logarithmically harder to do it on three, and then you get to 4 or 5, and again, it's really difficult on that front. So when an organization is first starting to make inroads and start to think about moving some workloads to the cloud, right? One cloud tends to be an obvious solution on that front. Obviously, Nicola had some, specific considerations that forced you, kind of multi-cloud from day 1 or 2 or 3, right? But pretty early on. How mature does an organization really need to be able to, somewhat reliably support multiple cloud providers? Now, Nicola, you want to, just start just in terms of what your journey was to, get ready for that? Are you working with different abstraction layers? Do you just have to have folks that are specialists in each one of your cloud platforms? What does that look like in your environment?
Well, I suppose we grew and learned over time and adapted.
Meaning the hard way.
Yeah, hard way. So we actually started with the Linode, I think about 12 years ago or something like that. Yeah. So, and then different situations come into place where I don't know, some client demand has requirements to deploy everything in their own country, and the cloud provider that you're using doesn't have is not positioned there, so you have to use some local provider and so on, and so, or perhaps it's a legal requirement that all of the user data must be stored in a certain jurisdiction now. So another example would be the client has demanded that everything is actually deployed in their own private cloud.
Right.
So it's very, how should I say, heterogeneous situation for us. We have to accommodate for different scenarios. Yeah.
Wow.
So
You've built a lot of your own kit to be able to, support that environment, I would guess, or those environments, right? Multiples and plurals.
yeah, we actually have a relatively large infrastructure department with sysadmins, database admins, and DevOps people. So they act like a buffer or glue between our software development departments and the actual infrastructure. So it's very important for us to keep that kind of talent and grow it. Yeah.
That's right. Interesting. Pavel, do you see some different things in kind of your travels?
No, I actually think you brought up a great point, because what I think some of what you were saying isn't just selecting the right cloud, but the right service in the cloud. Meaning, if I choose to build, okay, we're Akamai, let's just use transcoding media workflow, right? There are places where I can go, and a number of them get the transcoding workflow, and I pay per minute, and great. Or I can buy the software, use open source, and build the solution like you did. And the decision there is, before you even get to which cloud, is do I build it, right? It gets a little bit before to the do I build it or buy it kind of thing, because now if I go with SaaS, yes, quicker to market, I can get it done quickly, but locations depend on the service, right? Features depends on the service, where I deploy it, how much capacity. So that's the trade-off, right? As we think about the workloads and how we architect and build these things. On the other hand, your approach, right? We've built it. Yes, you have this infrastructure team, but now you can take, and this leads into the portability discussion. Now you can take and put a VM, right? Whether it be choose your favorite container format, choose your favorite VM format. You can move those everywhere and then deal with that a lot easier, right? To deal with the location requirements. I mean, heck, we've, especially with some security folks, we've had people literally ask us if we can keep packets within a certain geography on the internet, right? So that's the kind of things you have this request coming from. So when you do that approach, right, the trade-off is, yes, it's a little more work and you have an infrastructure team, but that investment, and we've seen this amongst our customers as well. Now you can kind of do a lot more and move stuff around with a lot more impunity and be a lot less locked in and take advantage of, egress, functionality, location, sovereignty, and so forth. So basically, yes to everything you said. And that's kind of the trade-off that's the discussion that we like to engage people with. And then security, it's a whole different thing. But we'll
you bet. And I think we kind of stumbled upon, and not intentionally, by the way, I didn't have some grand plan to say, the first thing we got to discuss is trade-offs, right? But ultimately, that's what we got to discuss, right? Because, there's going to be the ease of use versus the control, right? And probably your point about, leveraging some of the services that, a cloud provider can bring to bear, whether it's CDN, whether it's, kind of edge, kind of computing infrastructure that supports that, whether it's, things on the security side, like WAF or certificate management, or, there are hundreds of different services that, your cloud provider can handle. But Nicola, to one of your points is, we couldn't afford to get locked into, kind of a certain provider. So again, that's one of these other trade-offs, right? If you can, if lock-in's not a problem, serverless workloads are pretty cool, right? But you know what? You're not moving from one cloud provider serverless environment to the next cloud provider serverless environment, not without a huge amount of refactoring and basically, rebuilding. So all of this, kind of multi-cloud stuff, all of this, portability concept requires, specific trade-offs. So how do you make those trade-offs, right? Is it, Nicole, you mentioned, that you had to learn a lot of this stuff. And I would imagine it was learning the hard way, right? What didn't work, you finally got to what did work by doing a whole bunch of stuff that didn't work, right? So should folks be prepared, to make those, specific trade-offs, or are there things that they could pick up from your experience, or, kind of some of the stuff that you've been through that'll help streamline maybe their, kind of path to being able to support multi-cloud?
Well, I suppose it all depends on from organization to organization, from the type of product that someone is offering and so on. But we had our path for a long time, and we've changed a lot of things. We learned in the process, and I suppose that currently we have like three different I should call them generations of architecture in our production, because as the time goes on and you improve, some of the customers are already on the previous system, and you can't decommission those, right? You have to maintain them, develop them, and so on. But nowadays we tend to have a more optimal approach, one that gives us perhaps more portability, more ways to move around. So yeah.
No, that's interesting, right? And again, I think that you hit on a very important point there, which is, when you make architectural decisions, you really only can decide based upon what you have in front of you, right? And being, kind of in the space for 10 years, it's funny. I can, probably carbon date, different architectures based upon what services are there, right? Because again, if you're looking at something that was, designed early on, 2011, 2012, 2013, when cloud was first starting, you see certain constructs and a lot of homegrown stuff, right? That, probably doesn't work too well from that side. When you go, oh, that's early cloud, right? You didn't have reliable identity and access management, right? You didn't have, kind of built-in CDN or WAF or message queuing, or, 1,000 different things that are there now. You looked at where stuff was in 2015, 2016, you started seeing, again, some more of these, capabilities, especially in terms of managed workloads. And then you started seeing serverless capabilities come in 2019, 2020. So, it's interesting that over time, right, as the cloud providers offer more and more stuff, right, you get a lot more options in terms of, kind of how you're going to really platform your environment, where it's going to be. And then you have to factor that in with a lot of the trade-offs that we were talking about: jurisdiction, kind of compliance, customer needs. You'll sit there and go, well, we've got to run that on-prem. You had mentioned that before, right? In a private cloud. I think, Pavel, that was you. Because we can't have that data anywhere besides something that's in our own managed data center, but we want to take advantage of cloud. So again, it's interesting perspective in terms of going into it, I would say, eyes wide open, right? In that you are going to have to make choices. You are going to have to make trade-offs. Nothing is going to be optimal. And, ultimately you're going to have, kind of specialization on each one of the specific platform. So, Pavel, you having been a long time Akamai, kind of, person, and then, data centers before then, and working with carriers. Yeah. How have you kind of seen that evolution, happen, but, going from one and specializing using those services to, maybe having to think a little bit more strategically about, supporting different environments?
I think the pace with which technologies are launched far exceeds the pace with which they're retired. So you end up every year, you have more stuff that is an option and still supportable, right? To your point, right? In the US, 2G just got turned off in 2018 for those, or 2017 for those keeping count, right? So the point being that you're going to have a lot of options, and the looking back sometimes, yeah, it doesn't make sense because you know what, honestly, if your HA proxy backed load balancing works for this service and you've got probably 50 other features or things you have to launch, is that the top priority, right? Going back to, do you make your decisions? No. Do you re-architect that? Maybe right now, no. But that's not to say just because you don't re-architect that as you go forward and launch new service X, which you say takes priority, do keep in mind that the technology has changed, to your point. You maybe don't have to roll your own HA proxy or your own messaging queue with Kafka or whatever, or maybe you do, right? Maybe there is some network connectivity that can get you what you need. So I think the kind of takeaway from that is, yes, there's going to be stuff. There's always going to be old stuff, right? We still listen to radios, right? And there's streaming TV. The options will always increase, and it doesn't mean that you should necessarily rip everything out, but especially as you're looking, right, and kind of prioritizing, all right, I'm building things, think about what you have open. And then you run into analysis by paralysis, but just be aware, especially with, the number of clouds and the number of features and the distribution there, keep that in mind. And that's a good place to start. And going back to your earlier point, that's a good place to build that fluency of multi-cloud, right? You don't have to rip everything out and go, oh, my core workload here, let me try this. Maybe not the best approach if you want to build that skill set and that muscle memory with cloud.
Yeah, that's right. So we did get a question in here, and for those of you that are out there, if you want to pop questions into the chat, that's great. We can certainly kind of address them as they come in. So this question is, should we consider the size of the workload as well when choosing the cloud? Hi, Rob. Right at the wrong button on that. So who has an opinion on that one? How do you consider the size of the workload? When choosing the cloud, is that a major consideration, or just everybody can kind of support kind of whatever I need nowadays?
Maybe I can jump in.
Yeah.
So I think I read your reports from previous quarters. I got the impression that many organizations start with one of the big hyperscalers, and then over time they figure out, okay, so perhaps we can't scale this way in terms of price performance, but and then they find out that there are a lot of alternative cloud providers that perhaps provide core infrastructure primitives such as compute and object storage and so on for a good price performance ratio. So I think that today there are a lot of options to choose from, and it's actually exciting time to be building your services, your applications. And so yeah,
there is lots of options. Oh, Pavel, obviously Linode, when they join the family, so to speak,
yes.
You got a lot more options to be able to, help customers and really platform some of their applications. So was size, kind of an issue from the standpoint of what you started seeing in terms of customer attraction?
So I think for some, yes. And I would just relate to everyone the perspective of which we're talking about are things like Monday Night Football, updates of popular OSs that we'd all be familiar with, video games. So when we talk about capacity, we talk in the terabit range and the peta plus bit range of storage across locations. So for those customers, yes, size and choosing the cloud provider, the distribution provider, everything is critical. And in reality, right, when you're pushing that kind of stuff, most of these people do multiple networks and have built their own and do a combination of things. Going back to, I think, the spirit of the question, for the most part, I especially, and we'll speak specifically for us, there's, the cloud, part of the great thing is the capacity that you needed, unless you're kind of talking about these, second and third standard deviation folks where where you're planning things. But I think the other thing I'd suggest we think about architecturally, not just cloud and capacity, but where in the cloud. And we mentioned it a couple times. So when I plan my workload, if I'm going to do, like, let's say this big AI analytics workload, that should go in the cloud because I need a lot of capacity. But if I maybe want to do some personalization on, some security, maybe that's better at the edge because I don't need that much capacity. So just to complicate things for everyone, I guess when you're thinking about capacity in the cloud, right, the cloud's generally, unless you're one of these huge billion, multi-trillion dollar companies, for the most part should have all the capacity you need. But think of not just the capacity in terms of the clouds, but where in the cloud. Going back to what we mentioned, some things should be closer. These bigger things, do I have the capacity to run a personalization engine? Do I have the capacity to run some auth really close to the users in order to speed up the response time and the security that you talked about?
And that kind of infers application architecture is still important.
Yes. Yes, pretty much.
We could sit there and talk about, we have the most functional cloud platform and it has all these services and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, especially with modern application architecture, microservices based, right? API centric. It gives you a lot of options for where you start to think about how your compute, kind of resides, right? Or where your compute resides. And then you can, start to overlay that with some of the jurisdictional issues. Nicola, your point about having to use a provider, in a certain geography. I just kind of got this vision of, two guys in kind of like basically a petrol station, somewhere with a rack of servers like, hey, this is your cloud provider and, this specific country, but you know what? They like to bet. Or they like to gamble. So therefore you're going to, do that. So, I would guess you've done a number of site visits and you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do, with this kind of thing. But again, that's where application architecture, and I think as you said, Nicola, the infrastructure, kind of environment that you've built to be able to support, maybe some variance on the bottom end ends up, kind of becoming very, very important as you really need to support a lot of these different platforms.
Yeah, well, it's not that bad as you illustrated, but
they actually have raised floor and HVAC and that kind of thing.
We have fortune with being able to pick some really good cloud providers in certain countries. So yeah, besides the obvious choices, yeah. So.
Oh, that's great. So let's see what everybody else said, right? So we've had a little chat about, kind of why, a lot of multi-cloud and why they're, again, in terms of survey results, and I'll go through these pretty quick because we want to get to, more the categories and why. But, so why are you considering the addition of one or more cloud providers? And again, kind of the big ones are, we need to be less reliant on a single provider, right? And cost. So it's really a risk management thing, right? Kind of you just can't, kind of rely on one thing. And to be clear, and again, I'm old enough to remember when we had pretty much 100% of our workloads in a specific data center, not counting all the mainframe stuff that we kind of moved to data centers in Texas, right? But, kind of that's a different issue and only old people will be able to, kind of appreciate, the transition of the mainframes when they moved out. But, kind of there was a time where outages were kind of expected because we were having to run that stuff ourselves. Now with a lot of the modern cloud providers, we're bickering between 3 nines and 4 nines, which, by the way, when you're in a 100% available environment, makes a difference. But it's 3 nines and 4 nines. When we used to be at like 90%, it'd be like, hey, this is great. We're up 90%, right? So I think that we've gotten a little bit spoiled from that standpoint, but all the same, you have expectations and you have to plan, right? For resilience, you have to plan for, the potential that, kind of your cloud provider is going to have a problem and make sure that you can recover for that. So Nicola, how much time do you guys spend on resilience and making sure that you can, kind of recover from anything that happens within the cloud provider, again, given some of the jurisdictional issues and some of the, kind of privacy issues that you deal with in a lot of different geographies?
Well, first of all, we currently use around, I think, 9 different cloud providers, including some like Linode and Hetzner, and actually and the GCP and some other within the certain countries. And one interesting side effect of using let me say first that most of those cloud providers have a really great uptime, and that's actually why one of the reasons why we chose to use them. But interesting thing is that once in a while, some of those cloud providers will have a major global outage. And the interesting side effect from our point of view is that this is actually a good thing that we're using multiple providers, since not all of the eggs are in the same basket, if you know what I mean. And this event does not have an effect on all of our customers, just a portion of them. So that's interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. So, Bob, so one of the things when we talk about and think about resilience would be supporting, standard, whether they're open source or not, right? But, kind of standard types of workloads, standard types of services to enable, that concept of, kind of moving, some of these workloads around to a greater degree. Do you see that? I mean, we're talking about now's as good a time as any, right? To, kind of slay the portability dragon. And let me just, kind of bring up, something, not this one, but, we did ask about portability in this quarter's survey. And what everybody basically said is, yes, we need portability. And it could be for a lot of different things, right? A variety of different use cases. And when the report hits in a week or two, you can dig into a lot of the data on that front for those of you listening out there. But, really the point is portability is something that the community has spoken and said this is absolutely, critical to us, even though we're not quite sure what that means to us yet. So have you seen, kind of that? And to what degree does, Akamai's ability to support, a variety of different technologies and open source platforms really help from that standpoint?
I mean, from our standpoint, if you look at before Linode, multi-cloud and multi-CDN was our life in our world. And going back to the resiliency thing, we saw a bunch of folks that would kind of in this world go, well, I don't need multi-cloud because I got 5 nines on my insert resource here, which is lovely. But does your application have 5 nines, right? From spoiled, like, oh yes, the resource has 5 nines, but have you designed this in a way? So as folks started to look at that and going, yeah, fine, my bucket's 5 nines of ability, but if my architecture is bottlenecked here, hardly matters now. So that started going down more of a kind of this, it helped them go to more multi-cloud architecture. And if you look at kind of what we were saying before, it was natural for us. Our world was multi-CDN, like we talked a little bit about those very, very large folks that push, internet shaking amounts of traffic. That was kind of the world we lived. The infrastructure that powers a lot of the apps that you use today, if you do a DNS and you look at pointed to Akamai in background, it's 6 or 7 clouds. It makes perfect sense. And not just 6 or 7 clouds, but you start within those clouds, multiple regions, going back to the resiliency discussion of, hey, which region do you go to? How do you load balance? But you also want to do it for performance. So this very complex world of in a distributed kind of microservice-y, cloud native-y, not LAMP stack kind of world is literally something we've been doing. And the reason, the Linode piece makes sense is they always had the same approach, right? You can move traffic on, you can import your VM, same thing with, the same philosophy of like swing your DNS over, move it over, because realizing that it's a big world and there's a lot of internet between your users and your cloud, we need to make sure that we can kind of connect the 2 instances, right, of your users and cloud. So that's, all that kind of stuff is something that we've lived and looking forward to building out now that we've got like that extra capacity and that combined platform.
Yeah, no, and it is interesting to, start to see how some additional capabilities, right? And options for customers really starts to get unlocked when you have not just the global distribution, network, the huge, get the ability to support Monday Night Football, right? But also, kind of the computing infrastructure to be able to allow customers to figure out what needs to be in a big data center versus what can be out on the edge versus what can, kind of be deployed. It really is, kind of network and latency dependent. It all gets back to, those specific trade-offs that we have to think about from that perspective. So I do want to bring up one more, kind of graph before we, kind of dive into it. And that's kind of this one, right? And this is, kind of a messy thing, but the thing that you have to, kind of understand here is that, over in these middle, kind of bears, when you think about the stuff that's most important, absolutely critical and most important, security and IAM are top of the list, right? And that goes to, without saying, right? I mean, if you can't protect the data that's in this cloud platform, you've got, a huge issue, right? But, you have also other stuff that's table stakes. I mean, the amount of importance that, folks, if you look at that yellow bar on the left, I mean, that's something that's, kind of important to everybody. And all these things, from the standpoint of, what you need to have, right? Kind of compute and storage and manage databases and manage containers. Those are the things that, unless you have that stuff, again, you can't really host any of your workloads in those types of environments. And then, some of the emerging ones that, again, were kind of surprising when we started to ask about those last quarter is, edge computing. Right. And is, kind of large outbound network and global infrastructure and all these things that, kind of, again, when you take a step back, you're like, well, duh, right? I mean, I need to have all the services that are there. I need to have them on a global basis. I need to have, kind of the scale and I need to be able to support, additional, kind of application environments. But, I look at this and go, okay, it's still kind of muddy. How do I know what's the best platform? Right, for these different types of applications, right? And Nicole, I don't know if you guys have been, I would suspect you are, given kind of the fact that you're supporting 9 different clouds. How do you kind of start to think about that choice? So you've got a new initiative that the developers or customers want. How do you start thinking about where is the best place to start with this kind of application? Is there a checklist that you have? Is well, we got a great deal from these guys this quarter, so we're gonna start putting some workloads in there, or are there real kind of technical reasons like these guys can't support that, so we're gonna default to this specific platform for this new use case. So how do you kind of walk through that discussion on your side?
Yeah, but well, it's there's no simple answer to that question.
All right, actually. Let's go. If there are no simple answers, then no.
So it's quite. Those are quite complex matters, and a lot of challenges arise from those. But during the time, I mentioned that we have like 3 different generations of architecture in our production. So our last most recent approach in the past 4 years is from the beginning we were using open source technologies. Early on we adopted container technologies, Docker and so on, and we use microservice architecture and CI/CD. So we are trying to standardize things and make ease of use for developers thing, and as well facilitate portability of our projects. We actually deploy all of our projects now in new projects in Kubernetes. So we additionally use tooling such as Rancher as an additional abstraction layer for different Kubernetes cluster management. So it gives us, I suppose, means to move some workloads from different clusters within a certain cloud provider, but also between different cloud providers. It's not things are not easy, but they're way much easier than they were or they are with some previous implementations.
Sure. And I would think that it's, interesting in that you kind of had to be intentional about, kind of a lot of the decisions that you made. And I think you learned that the hard way, right? Your first iteration, probably really difficult to move stuff and resilience and all that. And part of that may be just the services that were available. You've been at this for, kind of a number of years. Now you look at the architecture and it's, again, more intentional from the standpoint of supporting open source tech, right? Supporting, kind of standard environments like Kubernetes that are somewhat consistent, across, depending on the distribution you use and a lot of the other, surrounding tooling. But you kind of learn that stuff. And I think the thing that most resonated about what you said to me, Nicola, is it's complicated, right? You kind of snickered and said, it's complicated. And that's really the point. I think that, for folks that are, kind of going into it going, we're going to have a variety of different, kind of use cases. We're going to have a variety of different application environments that we have to, really support, understand there is complexity in that decision, right? Whereas if you go with a single provider, you're simplifying the interfaces, you're simplifying the service discussion, you're simplifying, kind of a lot of the selection, but you're giving up a lot of your flexibility. Unless you're really good at cloud architecture, you're giving up, a decent amount of resilience. You're impacting your ability to, again, support new tech and the like. So again, it's a trade-off like everything else. There's no right or wrong. And that's the other thing that I spend a lot of time with folks. They feel like because they had to re-architect something that they did something wrong. Nope. Right? No. Yeah. And I think that's a big emotional and mental jump that you have to make when you get into cloud stuff. I try to manage everybody's expectations that if you're not re-architecting every, kind of 2 to 3 years, there's something wrong with you. Because you're not optimizing, based upon, a lot of the services that are there. I mean, do you see the same thing, Paolo, where folks are kind of going back and looking at, really revisiting a lot of decisions that, I guess somebody would think had been made a couple of years ago?
100%. And I couldn't agree more with what you said, just because you re-architect and change, because and the other point, being intentional about things, forget whatever technical decision, but even getting the teams on board. Going back to a simple example, do we do SaaS or do we build it? Do we go here or there? We want to do this. We are trying to accomplish this. Getting everybody on board, then yes, going, this is what we're going to try to accomplish, right? Is over the last few years, a number of folks that have, migrated apps and done, cloud native migrations, everything. That's hugely important to get everybody on the same page and be intentional, but don't confuse that with meaning you have to know everything from off the bat, because you're not going to, unless you were literally sitting there and doing cloud architecture for the last 10 years. And even then you have a very specific instance, right? Yeah. 90% of your stuff might be the same. Maybe it's 80%, but your application will be different. Your business needs will be different. You'll have some requirement or some weird thing like that mainframe kicking around, right? That you have to somehow kind of do an IPsec tunnel to your VPC.
Exactly. Put a stack on it. Everything will be great.
Right. I mean, you'll have some weird thing, but be intentional and realize that you're not going to know, and then approach it that way, because your next iteration, and going back to is re-architecture bad? No, because now you've learned something, and now, next year, hey, there is this Rancher expansion where you can deploy to all these different regions, and it does all this other new stuff that makes natting easier and whatever, right? That's right. Why wouldn't you use that when it becomes available, going to what we said previously? So it's not I guess keeps us all employed or frustrated, but there's constantly new, better ways of doing things, and going back to choosing which ones do we apply those new things with versus which ones do we ride out, to kind of balance this efficiency of the number of people that we have when we have to roll stuff out,
That's right. Across multiple platforms, right? Which have different, and require different skill sets. So I'll get back to, kind of one thing that, keeps resonating. And I've had to learn this, again, over and over and over again, over the last, couple of years, is that, really, and we've kind of all agreed to this, right? Being intentional about what you want to do in this environment becomes absolutely critical, because again, you can't kind of get all wrapped up around, kind of bad decisions, because we're all going to make bad decisions, right? And the other thing is the premium on architecture. And that's really one of the things that again, we kind of minimized for a long time, and architects, but now that's your, path to success, right? I mean, Nicola, you couldn't do what you do on the number of platforms that you do without architects sitting there figuring out what the best way to assemble all of these pieces are together.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything that you guys said. Yeah.
So we do have questions. So we got 10 minutes left. We can do some questions on this. I love that. Thank you, everybody, for putting your questions in. All right. So this one, at this time, a lot of are going as cloud native. Should we consider that a mandatory thing, or using third-party tool hosted with the cloud or outside makes sense? If we do use a third-party tool, then how can we make sure we are doing it the right way? So that gets back to choosing your services thing and buy versus build, right? So there are a lot of different distributions. Let's just take Kubernetes as an example, right? So there are a lot of different distributions that you can use, right? You can implement it, on a cloud platform. You can use the platform that, kind of the cloud provider has. AWS has one, Linode has one, right? Kind of a way to, run Kubernetes in a managed, kind of fashion in that environment. What makes the most sense? Is it based upon the skills that you have in place? Is it, kind of, again, portability has to rule. If that's one of your key issues, then you've got to roll your own. How do you start to go about making that decision, relative to supporting, again, rolling your own versus, kind of leveraging a cloud provider offering? And either one of you guys can jump in on that one. I'm not good at point.
Well, if I may, it depends on the use cases. I suppose for everyone is different. So, but I think you should think about what you should envision what would happen in the long run. If you choose a certain path, let's say you're on AWS, which is a fantastic provider. It has, I think, over 350 services or so.
That's right.
So if you decide early on to use some of those very specific proprietary services, then you're definitely limiting your options in the future. But perhaps that will work in long run for your business, and perhaps it will not.
That's right.
Yeah, and Kubernetes is kind of an interesting one, I think, because it's kind of in between. It's more of a platform where you do have a lot more portability, especially if you have a CNCF certified, compliant one.
Yep.
So I guess, and this is more personal experience rather than any production, I found it easier to start when I started my kind of Kubernetes playing around with, to go with a managed Kubernetes service, to get the notion of pods, to get some of the concepts right, and not have to muck around with that additional layer. Now, these days, as I do stuff kind of on my own, I'm an admin person, so I will roll my own kernel and whatnot. But in reality, if you're starting, kind of, Nicole, to your point, I would start with a managed service, right? Because that gets you familiar with all that. And if you find that maybe some of the networking layer, like Calico, doesn't give you what you need, or something else, then you can start rolling your own. Because when you do, all those same notions and concepts of pod and kubelets and all that stuff is happy. So specifically with Kubernetes, I would start with a managed service, pick your favorite one, and then see how much that meets your needs and dig deeper.
Exactly. And I would also, again, just kind of layer in that if it's going to need to be moved between providers at some point, that colors your decision a little bit as well. So
Very
agree when you're first starting to get moving. Having somebody else take on a lot of those operational responsibilities makes more sense rather than less sense. But again, understand what those specific trade-offs are. So one other question I want to add, because I think this is kind of pertinent to selecting workloads or selecting cloud providers. Can we find out kind of the strengths of each of these cloud providers? Right? Is there a method to compare the services in each cloud provider and play around with it? So let's start with Pavel. I mean, you have customers coming all the time to, kind of say, how do I get my feet wet in your environment, learn about it? How do I get, are there third parties that test these things out? What do you recommend folks do when they want to learn more about Linode?
I am prejudiced and a tinkerer. I'd log in. And going back, the very quick background is, back in the days of infrastructure and you had proprietary OSs and standards, you couldn't play with it and you couldn't try it. Now, if I have a VM, a container, an app or something, I can deploy it really here and do a free performance test with a web tool and see how fast it is, right? And go, okay, does this do what I need it without a whole heck of a lot of effort? Without more than kind of signing up. So my point of view is play with all of them, right? They're free. I have accounts on every single one. I play with all of them and then, go from there. That's why the other thing about cloud is really nifty, right? You don't have to go to Oracle for some weird, enterprise 10i license to get experience with it, right?
Although some SaaS providers do mandate that you run things in a certain cloud.
Yes, those
that's
are
a different discussion. We'll have a different. Nicola, do you try these things out before you do stuff, or?
Yeah, I agree with what Pavel said. Definitely, everything is accessible nowadays, and you can create an account in minutes and try anything out, and it shouldn't be too expensive to try things out and figure out how things work and what the performance is of different services. So yeah, putting some proof of concept projects and different providers
in cloud, prototype is your friend, right? So getting things up there, seeing how it works. Obviously, you can't really test it at scale until you test it at scale, right? So then you're relying on, again, your community and folks that to get some perspective on that. And I think that's a great way to, kind of wrap it up before we hand it off to Cody, so everybody can get their gift cards, since we know that's why everybody sticks around anyway. But listen, it's complicated. I guess that's kind of the net here, right? It's a complicated environment. There are a lot of different considerations in terms of trying to find, the right cloud for your specific workload. But if you look at it from the standpoint of, intentionally architecting an environment that gives you the flexibility to make choices, right? When you don't and aren't intentional about stuff, you don't have choices. You're stuck in, you're locked in when they jack up the prices, which we've never seen before, right? When they jack up the prices, you're kind of stuck there because you haven't factored that in up front. So a little bit of architecture up front, a little bit of, intentionality in terms of understanding that at some point you may want to move this workload will save you a lot of angst and heartburn on the back end. So that's going to be the net of our talk today. That's going to be, again, the focus of, kind of the report. I want to thank Nicola and Pavel. Really appreciate, you guys, especially Nicola. It's almost beer o'clock for you, right? So, at some point, it'll be time for the afternoon cocktail. So thank you for being here. And Pavel as well. Really appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
I am Mike Rothman, and Cody, it's all your show. Wrap us up, babe.
I will do. Thank you for that handoff, Mike. So to everyone who has been with us for this past hour, thank you for joining us. I'd like to remind you that this session was recorded. Should you want to rewatch or maybe share with a friend, you'll be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. So the 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Kieran S., Emily H., Natalia C., and Dragon S. H. So to our 4 winners, please keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. But if you don't happen to see that email, do check your spam folder. I'd like to thank Akamai for sponsoring today's program. And for everyone who has joined us, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time and we really appreciate your feedback. So with that being said, there will be a survey that will pop up on your screen as soon as we close out. And we'd really like for you to tell us what you liked about our program or maybe what you'd like to see on a future program. Otherwise, we hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day. And Nicola, Pavel, Mike, thank you all once more.
Cheers all.
Cheers.